Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to week 3. We're going to talk about the Greeks today. I'm sure that's why the room is packed, right? You're just anxious for this topic. I was feeling pretty confident about things until Pastor Brian started talking about the perils of balding men, and so now I'm going to be seeking church counseling. So if any of you are here, talk to me afterwards. Let's go ahead and open up in prayer, but before I do, what a great morning service with the baptisms. Congratulations to the 3 people. That's just wonderful. It's very uplifting, very hopeful, and it was just an incredible time. Heavenly Father, we're thankful for the lives that have been changed, the baptisms we witnessed today, the chance just to come to your house and worship you and learn more about your word. I pray that you would keep us safe in this inclement weather, and that you would bless this time we have as we learn more about your word in all of these classes and about the people who kept your word alive, and just for your faithfulness all throughout time. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. I like to keep these, as church related or Bible related as possible, but I just had to do, after winter jog, man decides obesity is not so bad. All right. Today's prize, you have your choice between the Snickers and the Smarties. So this is a trivia question I do every week. During his life, Alexander the Great named 70 cities after himself and one after... You want the Smarties or the Snickers? All right. I can't... Each of you can probably share one Smartie for those of you who else yelled that out. I'll deal with you later, I guess. But he named the city after his horse. And I thought this was an amazing bit of trivia, and I was all amped up about it. And I was trying to come up with some other answers that would lead you astray from the horse one. Because he can't do his wife and his son and then throw the horse in there. Everybody would automatically know. So I asked Alice last night for some help, and I said, here's the question. Alexander the Great named 70 cities after himself and one after, and she goes, was it his horse? All right.
Which city was it?
You are ahead of me. Bucephalus. This wasn't just any horse, ladies and gentlemen. This was like one of the most legendary horses in all of history. I mean, you got Secretariat and then this one. It is, he is represented in sculpture, in art, and the city is in Pakistan, pretty close to the Indian border. See Afghanistan there, but there's a city in Pakistan that was named after Alexander's horse. So I thought that was fascinating.
You said it was Greek for ox head.
Greek for ox head? Okay. So you looked that up, didn't you? Please tell me you looked that up. All right. All right. Well, last week I talked about the Persians and the influence they had on this time, because it was the Persians, once they recede from the picture, or actually while they're still in the picture, that's where the Old Testament ends. And we get into this time, these 400 years in between Old and New, and we don't really see, by the time the Old Testament ends, their influence on the Jewish people. But then we talked about the religious beliefs that they had, how the Persians believed in one God and talked about life after death and angels and resurrection of the dead and things like that. And we could see how that belief and the Jews living among those people, how that kind of seeped into their culture, so that when they moved back, they start introducing things like resurrection of the dead that Judaism hadn't really seen before. So that was the major influence of the Persians. But I'm telling you, nothing compared to the Greek influence. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. For those of you who are in school, college especially, and thought you'd get a break from Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and all those people, I'm sorry, you got to put up with it for just a little bit longer. But I'm not going to dwell on those guys too long. I just want to mention them briefly as I fly through this period. This is a map of the Greek Empire at its extent, its biggest reach. Goes all the way to India, starts in Greece, goes down through Egypt, all the way to India. It's pretty incredible how all this was accomplished within a matter of 8 to 10 years. So back then, too, it's not like they get on a bullet train and go over there and conquer it, or even in a tank, right? So some brief background on the early Greeks. They were known for city-states. It wasn't really a Greek empire per se. It was a bunch of city empires that joined together. And the two biggies were Sparta and Athens. I keep wanting to say Athens every time I see that. But it's Athens and Loami, the two big city-states of same. And these two city-states were as different as they could possibly be. You had Sparta, who was, they were the stable, military inclined, demanded the service and loyalty of every male between the ages of 18 and 60. Once a Spartan boy turned 18, bye-bye mom, probably not going to see her again, because it was a life of military service focused on the army. Spartan is actually an adjective and not just a noun. When you see a room, an apartment, or a hotel room that has just the bare bones of furnishings, no frills attached at all, maybe a bed, maybe an end table, it's called Spartan, right? Something that's very simple. And they were very simple. They were all about order. And then you had the 180 of that, and that was Athens. They were a freewheeling democracy. Any order about Athens was that they proceeded orderly from one crisis to the next crisis to the next crisis. And, they were all about democracy. They were all about improving the participation of people, as long as you were an adult male. And then, it was a younger male. And then but it was all about democracy, everybody having an equal voice in the governing of Athens. And so, both of these cities were going pretty strong. And then, of course, a civil war broke out. It was called the Peloponnesian War. And, they had these wars all throughout the 5th century BC. Sparta eventually won, but both sides were really, really weak and was ripe for someone else to come in and take advantage of it. I thought this was fascinating, though. Sparta and Athens had this battle in 490 BC throughout that whole century. And they signed a peace treaty in 1996. This is a story for UPI, March 12, 1996. Athens and Sparta signed peace pact. They've signed a symbolic peace pact that officially ends the Peloponnesian War that ravaged Greece 2,500 years ago. So, you think your fight with your significant other lasted a while. So of course, when you think about Greece, you think about these old guys in togas talking about things that, even if it's in English, I won't understand a word you're saying. But it was really the Greeks who first started talking about why everything or anything exists. I would get a headache in class just trying to make sense of all of this. What is the world made of? What's the meaning of it all? How can we know knowledge? What should we do with this knowledge? On and on and on through all these different, some of them meaningful rabbit holes and some of them pretty crazy ones, but they kept asking, it's like the toddler, kept asking why? So that was their contribution to things. They also saw the explanations about how the world out there worked and demanded some hard thinking about the process of knowledge and communicating it. But this was all without God, right? This was all without the knowledge of a creator God who is sovereign and who works his will in the affairs of mankind. The big guy, Socrates, or Socrates if you're a child of the 80s like me. He was the founder. He was the guy who asked, what is knowledge? What is justice? Absolute truth. There is such a thing. I love it when people get on TV, usually talking about religious stuff and arguing Christianity, and say there's no such thing as absolute truth, when that's a statement of absolute truth right there. It just always confused me. sentenced to death for corrupting the youth. So he was made kind of a scapegoat for all the problems of society. The reason they say he corrupted the youth was because he didn't follow the state-sanctioned gods, of which there were many, but he either followed his own or made up his own or worshiped none of those, and so they thought, we can't have that, and so he drank the poison. It's interesting, though, he actually wrote nothing in his life. Everything we know about Socrates doesn't come from him. It comes from his number one student, Plato, right. Plato was Socrates' pupil, wrote the Republic, the allegory of the cave. I'm sure college students have probably heard about the allegory of the cave at some point. Founded the Academy, speaks of an immortal soul. He actually his thinking influenced Christianity during the early church. It's called Platonism. This world is just a shadow. Material things, including the body, are man's prison. And a good God wouldn't be involved in making material things. Salvation, if there is such a thing, lay in correct thinking. If people only knew how to do right, if they had the knowledge of what right is, then they'd do it. The reason people don't do right is because they don't know what right is. That flies in the face of everything I know about human nature, right? And what the Bible says. But you see this in American history with things like the social gospel. Oh, we can just make the world perfect if we do the right thing, if we eliminate alcohol, if we eliminate, all these other vices that we see, then we can create this perfect society that Jesus can return and rule over. Which is about the time the Civil War happened, but that's a whole other story. And then Plato had a number one pupil, Aristotle. He was a little bit different than Plato. He might have been different, in all other ways too, but he was a true love of order and science, not this pie-in-the-sky thinking. Happiness is achieved by moderation and self-control. The goal of life to him was happiness. It was virtue. Our goal is to be happy, not to know what happiness is. You don't need to give me a lecture on what happiness is. If I feel happy, then that's the goal. It's the virtue of the shoemaker isn't to understand the concept of shoe, but just to be able to make the shoe. Right? That was Aristotle's thinking. There's a famous painting by Raphael, not the Ninja Turtle. I just wanted to throw that in for some of you there. Called The School of Athens. And all these philosophers are represented in this painting, and right smack dab in the middle are Plato and Aristotle. Plato is pointing up, Aristotle's pointing down or pointing ahead, and there's a message there in that painting. Plato is saying that, truth and reality and knowledge are not here. They are some philosophical thing to comprehend, and Aristotle's saying, no, the reality is right here. Truth, reality, knowledge are right here in this world, but we have to study and reason correctly. So a lot of these Greek philosophers, I'll go over this a little bit next week, but you can see that kind of thinking seep into the New Testament, not in the writing of the New Testament, but when Paul and Peter and those guys are trying to get the churches in order, it's because a lot of these churches have been corrupted by this thinking. And they're trying to guide them out of that. All right, so that's just a little background on the philosophers. I want to go back to Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Remember, the gold head was supposed to be Babylon, Persia was the silver part, and now we're at the bronze belly part, which are the Greeks. It actually even says Greece in the Bible a couple of times. Before they become a major power, they are listed in Daniel and in one other prophet. It might be it's Zechariah, I think. So, but these are, for future reference, these are the visions that were talked about in Daniel that mentioned Greece. Daniel 7, 6, and 17 talks about Greece as a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. And then Daniel 8, verses 3 through 8 talks about a battle between a ram with 2 horns, which was the Medo-Persian Empire, and a goat with 1 horn, which is supposed to be Alexander, and the horn breaks off and splits into 4 smaller ones. Pretty amazing prophecy. I've got this right here. Daniel 8, verses 20 through 22. Again, this is talking about the Greeks. The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. The broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. So, people who say the Bible's vague, pretty much spelled it out right there, right? So a couple of kings here who are important in what happens in world history and in the history of the Bible. Darius I, I mentioned him last week. They talk about him in the book of Ezra. He's the one that facilitated the roads, and you have that Herodotus quote about that the post office uses, neither rain nor sleet and all that. So he's the one who began warring with the Greeks. You have this great, big, vast empire, and the bigger your empire gets, the harder it is to manage. And the most vulnerable spots of your empire are going to be at the outer boundaries of it. And so the Greeks just kind of saw their moment and started nipping away at some of the border islands and border parts of the Persian Empire. And so Darius decides to put a stop to it. He sent 600 ships to stop a Greek revolt. This was in the islands that are around Turkey. And half of them were lost in a sudden windstorm. Darius should have gotten the clue by now. He didn't read Daniel, I don't think. But this was just a harbinger of things that were to come. So this is one of my favorite stories in all of ancient history. Those of you who know this, don't spoil it for me. Don't shout this out just yet. So Darius decides, I'm going to get my revenge on these people some other way. So in 490, the Persians attack Greece, the mainland, not the islands. Once again, though, Persians were pushed back into the sea. They lost 6,400 men. The Greeks lost only 192 men. This was on the shoreline of Greece. So they send this Greek messenger to run the entire distance from this island city back to Athens to spread the good word. And the guy ran 26.1 miles, and he collapsed and died. This was the Battle of Marathon. Yes, that's where we get the name Marathon, over a guy who couldn't handle running 20. Well, who am I to talk, right? But is that miles or yards? Hold on, let me. All right. So that's where we get the word marathon. 26.1 miles. That was the distance that the poor guy ran. And he was able to get the news to him, but then he keeled over and died right then and there. So that was during Darius's time. Then we get his successor, Xerxes, who was Esther's husband. Ahasuerus was his Persian name. He gathers an army of 2 million soldiers from 46 different nations. Okay, the ship thing to the islands didn't work. The marathon thing didn't work. Now we're going to get, 2 million people. And so, if you've seen that movie 300, or you're familiar with that story, this is where they defeat Sparta's 300 at the pass of Thermopylae, but it was at a great cost. It was one of those in history like Bunker Hill, where you win, but it's really a loss because it cost you a lot more than it cost the losing side. So they lose at other places like Salamis and Plataea. Won't really get into those all too much, but it just shows you what they faced, despite hugely outnumbering the Greeks. And after Plataea, they retreated back to Persia. And when the Greeks had their the threat was stopped for a while, that had far-reaching consequences. They started talking about freedom became a part of the Greek language. Persians and anybody Oriental, right? That was used to describe the East as a group, were portrayed in a different light. They started mocking the Persians as barbarians. That's where we first get use of this term. The word bar in Greek is like the word blah for us. Blah, 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 just blathering on, right? And for the Greeks, that interprets as bar, 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 and then that's how they get the term barbarians. So I thought I'd throw this little meme in here. Tiny village in western Plataea, blah, 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 blah. That's kind of what that, for those of you who like Groundhog Day, that's what that was all about. Bar. Yep, that's where barbarian is from. Just throwing these guys in here real quick, just in case you're interested in doing some outside reading of this on your own. 3 historians I would suggest. Herodotus, you can find these at Gutenberg.org. He wrote about the Persian Wars, and he was actually like in the trenches with these guys. He's like one of these embedded journalists in Iraq. You know, they get in with the unit and write about everything from the battlefield as they saw it. One of the most famous historians in all of history that probably none of us have read, but should. I mean, it's really, really great stuff. He traveled all over the Greek world. He went to Egypt. He went to Mesopotamia. He went to the Balkans. He interviewed people. And he placed his reliance on what he'd seen with his own eyes and what he'd heard from other people. Thucydides is the other one. He was a general who witnessed the entire civil war between Sparta and Athens. He didn't talk about the gods intervening as you read in the Iliad and the Odyssey. You know, it was just strictly the Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am, approach to things. And then this guy fascinates me, Xenophon. When a Persian king was being conspired against by his younger brother, the younger brother didn't have enough power to beat his older king brother, so he hired Greek mercenaries to help him defeat the older brother. And Xenophon was one of the people, and they didn't win. The brother, the king Artaxerxes, survived the younger brother's attempt, but Xenophon went back home and wrote about this and said, you know what, I know where all of Persia's weak spots are, just by observing what I saw over there. I thought that was the basis for the word xenophobia, you know, the fear of foreigners, because here's a foreigner who came in and spied on us and you know, got all the goods, but it wasn't. It was some other reason. But he wrote a book, The Anabasis, about his experience there. All right, so what does this have to do with the Holy Land? What is Persia fighting with Greece while Israel is hundreds of miles away? What does that have to do with what happened on the Holy Land? Well, a couple of things. Persia was in charge of this area, but when they're focusing on Greece, they are weakened, right? They can't really control what's going on in Israel very much if they're focusing on the Greeks. And they aren't able to be as generous with the Jews as they have been. They might need to raise taxes in order to fund the army. They might need to do other things, curtail their civil liberties and things like that. And Greece and Egypt, remember, they're on the outer edges of the empire, so Greece and Egypt are looking to maybe attack that weak point. It got so bad that the Jews and Samaritans actually teamed up at one point to try to stop foreign powers. So that was the situation, that was the scene in the Holy Land during that time, a lot of uncertainty. And then along comes Alexander the Great. So in many ways, Alexander the Great has been regarded by historians as probably the greatest conqueror of all time, far and away the central figure in this period. He conquered Persia, Babylon, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, Western India. He's the horn of the goat in Daniel. And it's amazing since he apparently did all of this without a nose. I don't know if you can see that on there. It's just, but it's another amazing coincidence of history that Alexander's known as this Greek hero who wasn't from Greece. Napoleon's known as this French hero who wasn't actually from France. And Adolf Hitler was from Austria. You know, he's not even German, totally German in that sense. All these major figures in military history aren't from the places where they tried to rally around the flag. But here is a look at where he was from. Macedonia, this tiny little empire north of the Greek mainland. The first person, though, to really talk about is his father, Philip, who I guess Alexander got his nose from Philip, looking at that picture. So, Alexander's father was the king of Macedonia, Philip II. Philip was a very accomplished soldier. He's very ambitious, and he was reasonably cultivated, although the Macedonians had a reputation for being hicks, uncultured, uneducated, uncivilized compared to the Greek philosophers in their togas and tunics and who talk about philosophy all day long. So this kind of chafed at Philip, and he wanted his empire, his people, to be seen as educated. So his son Alexander, who's kind of a bookworm anyway, he wants Alexander to be raised in the Greek tradition and Greek education and Greek philosophers. So he hires a special tutor for his son, Aristotle. For me, that'd be a bummer. I've always hated it in college where the textbook was by the guy who wrote the text. The professor was the guy who wrote the textbook. So that'd be great, but it would also be very intimidating to have Aristotle as your tutor. So Alexander, or Philip rather, was seen as the man who transformed Macedonia and made them fully Greek. And he did this by attacking them. When they were weakened by all their civil wars and everything else going on, he saw his chance, and he attacked Greece, and he won a big victory, 338 BC. His son Alexander, who was in his late teens, was in this battle on one of the attacking wings. And Philip was very smart. He was able to unify all these bickering factions of Greece by promoting what's called Pan-Hellenism. The word for Greece in Greek is Hellas. So Hellenism, Helen of Troy, the ideal Greek woman, right? So he was able to capitalize on Greek nationalism to unify them to fight their common enemy, the Persians.
He made Greece great.
He made Greece great again. Yeah. We're going to attack the... Never mind. So the other thing is he, like many Macedonian kings, like many kings, period, were polygamists. So then we get to this moment in history called Philip's big fat Greek wedding. All right. He's still married to Alexander's mom. He's married to about 5 or 6 other women. And then he marries this young woman whose father was a famous general, Attalus. So he marries this young woman. Alexander's there. His mom is there, the wife number 2 or 3 or whatever she was. While dad gets married to this trophy wife, this younger 18-year-old, I think her name was Cleopatra, not that Cleopatra, but another one. So the new father-in-law, this general, gets up and makes a toast. Alexander's mom was from another empire, not Macedonian or Greek, but another outlying empire. So this general gets up and makes a toast to my darling daughter and her husband, King Philip. May they produce a legitimate heir to the throne. Alexander leaps up, grabs his sword, and says, "What does that make me?" And he uses a word for illegitimate. "What does that make me, you villain?" And he lunges at his dad's new father-in-law with his sword. Dad has to step in between, or else Alexander's going to cut this guy to pieces, and chastises Alexander for doing that and sends him on his way, and it creates a friction, as if the wedding didn't already do that, between Alexander and his dad. So Alexander goes to live with mom for a while, and they finally reconcile toward the end of Philip's life. They didn't know it was the end of Philip's life. Philip's daughter has a wedding about a year later. He's walking into the daughter's wedding feast, and he has himself treated like a god. They have him carried in on the bed or whatever, the throne that the guys have to carry, and they have statues of the gods accompanying them, and his bodyguard stabs him to death. And so Alexander winds up becoming king, the leader. And it was pretty good, an opportune moment for Alexander. Some people say a little too coincidental. Some people say the mom put the bodyguard up to it. But then Alexander was able to take over, and he really took over. The prophecy in Daniel talking about the Greeks as a leopard with wings, that's a good symbol of how fast Alexander's army moved. His force at the beginning was about 50,000, but it was never really over 35 after that, and he defeated all the armies of the known world during that short time. Granicus, Issus, Tyre and Gaza fell within a year, defeated Egypt after being crowned as Pharaoh/God, founded Alexandria, one of many cities with that name. He finally won in the Battle of Gaugamela. That was the last one. He was able to trick Darius III. Darius III was thinking he's going to attack at night. He's going to attack at night. Alexander's advisors were saying, let's attack at night. They're weak. Let's attack them at night. Alexander says, I think I'll wait a little bit. So Darius kept his troops up all night, waiting for the battle. And then when they are, dead to the world the following morning, no coffee or anything, that's when Alexander attacked and won a great victory. But he and his army, as it says there, faced culture clashes as they absorbed more and more of the Persian Empire. He was the type of guy who thought, I need to absorb the culture that I'm conquering, and then that will make them more loyal to me. But it's kind of hard to do that and keep the people who got you there, who've been trained to see these people as enemies. What I wanted to share with you here, though, is one of my, probably the favorite stories of this whole 8 weeks of what happened next. So he has always been in a conquering frame of mind. This says 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the order of his conquered territories. He conquers up here in what's now Turkey. He conquers Tyre and Gaza and Sidon. And he's heading toward Egypt. And look what's right there in the middle. The Jews are pretty peaceful people, but what's the top 3 rules of real estate? Location, location, location. They're just in a bad spot. They are right in the middle. They're like the political football. And so there are still Persians all around here that he's trying to get rid of. And, the high priest during this time was a guy named Jaddua. Alexander is sending word to Jaddua, I'm on my way. I need you to renounce your allegiance to Persia and follow me. Jaddua replies saying, I'm a man of my word. I have to keep my promise to the king of Persia no matter what the cost. So Alexander hears this and he is livid. So as he's on his way to Egypt, he's going to be making a little stop at Jerusalem to convince Jaddua, right? So picture yourself as Jaddua. You are in a defenseless, Jerusalem is no match for this guy, and he's on his way, and he's ticked, right? What am I to do? Meanwhile, the Samaritans see their opportunity. They've always had a fight, a struggle with the Jews about which of us is the real, Jewishness of the Bible, which is the real temple. Samaritans by this time built their own temple. The Jews tried to rebuild it, but Samaria has been there longer and people are more familiar with them. And so which group has the supremacy here? So the Samaritans see their chance and they go, they're going to be as flattering to Alexander as possible. Hey, we'll renounce our allegiance. We'll follow you. How about, in exchange for that, you kind of make us the top guys here in this region. We'll take care of things for you. We just want you to recognize us as being the legitimate Jewish temple and everything else, if you're fine with that. So Alexander, they think he's going to be agreeable to that. So he's heading down toward Jerusalem. I can picture the Samaritans following him, thinking they're about to experience something wonderful in their eyes. They're going to see Alexander go in and destroy the temple again and maybe hang Jaddua, and maybe we'll take some of the stuff in their temple and carry it back up to ours. Sanballat, the leader of the Samaritans, actually, Jaddua was of the high priest lineage. So Sanballat had his daughter given away in marriage to Jaddua's brother. So he could also have a son-in-law who was in that lineage. And Sanballat's thinking, this Alexander's going to come through. He's going to get rid of Jerusalem, the temple. He's going to put my son-in-law up as the real high priest, and then everything legitimate's going to be with me. It's going to be great. So Alexander gets to Jerusalem, and this is from the writing of Josephus. This is Alexander showing up. When he went up to the temple, he offered sacrifice to God according to the high priest's direction, and magnificently treated both the high priest and the priests. This is Alexander doing this. So, the night before I read the rest of this, the night before Alexander's visit, he has a dream where he sees a guy robed in white who's going to come and tell him something good. And so he shows up, still a little bit angry, in Jerusalem, and he sees Jaddua approaching him, dressed in white. And so he immediately changes his tune and starts being kind to Jaddua and goes to the temple and offers sacrifice in respect to God and the high priests. So Jaddua senses his moment. So he takes out the scroll of Daniel. And when the book of Daniel was showed him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he, Alexander, supposed that himself was the person intended. And as he was then glad, he dismissed the multitude for the present, but the next day he called them to him and bid them ask what favors they pleased of him. So he goes from, I'm going to destroy you, to, what can I do for you? Whereupon the high priest desired that they might enjoy the laws of their forefathers and might pay no tribute on the 7th year. He granted all they desired, and when they entreated him that he would permit the Jews in Babylon and Media to enjoy their own laws also, he willingly promised to do hereafter what they desired. And when he said to the multitude that if any of them would enlist themselves in his army on this condition, that they should continue under the laws of their forefathers and live according to them, he was willing to take them with him, and many were ready to accompany him in his wars. So not only do they get spared, they get a tax break. They don't have to pay taxes every 7th year. Picture the Samaritans at this point. They're following him expecting a bloodbath, and they can just take whatever's left and cart it back to where they're at. And from the first time he walks into the temple and doesn't do anything, they're starting to think, this is not how I envision this to go, right? And then he gives them a tax break. So you go from wanting these people all dead to, hey, wait a minute, we're Jews too. Can we have the tax break? That's exactly what happened. So this caused many Jews to ally with Alexander. Many critics who otherwise believed Josephus believe that this event never happened. I'll come to that in a minute. But they asked for the same tax break and claimed to be descendants of Joseph once they saw how Alexander favored the Jews. And Josephus, he's like one of these cable talk show people. He's not really objective. You can kind of tell which way he's going. For such is the disposition of the Samaritans, as we've already elsewhere declared, that when the Jews are in adversity, they deny that they are of kin to them, and then they confess the truth. But when they perceive that some good fortune had befallen them, they immediately pretend to have communion with them, saying that they belong to them and derive their genealogy from the posterity of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. So now the Samaritans are like, oh, yeah, we're buddies. Hey, can we have the same tax break? So back to this point, many critics who otherwise believe Josephus say that this little story never happened. So I have to ask you, why would you think, if they claim most of Josephus to be true, why would they have a problem with this particular story? Because of the book of Daniel. If they say that this is true, that's basically them confessing that Daniel was written when they say it was written. That it was a prophetic word about what was going on and not something that, let's just write this as though it was happening and we prophesied about it hundreds of years ago. It would be a confession that Daniel was exactly what we say it is. All right. So they beg Alexander for the tax break. Alexander says, let me think about it. I want you soldiers from Samaria to come with me. I'll have you actually settle in Egypt and help me out there. So he sticks a governor to rule Samaria while he takes all their men with him to Egypt. And while they are in Egypt, the Samaritans have a rebellion against this governor of Alexander's and burn him to death. So Alexander, once again, is like, every time I come here, I'm in a bad mood, right? And so he only now I've got a really good reason, because these people in Samaria have burned up my governor. So he actually has those rebels killed. I am not going to get through, Zechariah 9 talks about this to some degree, but I wanted to mention, this is my dig this for the week. I'll end with this. The Samaritans knew that they probably messed up by burning Alexander's guy. And when he comes back from Egypt after another conquering, triumph, they hide in a cave. And they take a lot of papyrus scrolls and clay stone tablets with them. And they are found and they are killed. Some 200 plus of them. Let's see, this was found in 1962 in a valley about 10 miles north of Jericho. This is where it's called the Wadi Daliah. That's where it was found. There's Jericho right there. There's the Samaritan city that was Shechem. Now it's called Nablus. I think that's in the West Bank. And you can see Jerusalem there. But they unearthed all the skulls of these Samaritans who were trying to escape from Alexander's wrath. 205 people they found there, and they found a bunch of papyrus scrolls and clay seals in Aramaic, and a lot of them were the deeds for the sale of slaves. So I didn't really get to finish Alexander's conquest, but you can see here how his conquest contributed to the bad blood between Samaritans and Jews. And I can't help but think about, and we're going to get into even worse examples than this, of the bad blood between these two. But when Jesus talks about the Good Samaritan and talks about shows kindness to the woman at the well who was a Samaritan, it makes it a little bit easier for me to understand why some Jewish people would not look at this guy as their Messiah, because they're expecting a Messiah who's going to be Mr. Jewish advocate, Mr. who's going to bring the Jews to triumph and put them on top of the world. And here he is associating with Samaritans and showing kindness to our number one bitterest enemy. How is this guy a Messiah for us? After every election, they have those bumper stickers, regardless of who wins, not my president. And after the next election, the Republicans said, hey, can we borrow your bumper sticker? We'll put it on our car. And every 4 years this happens. Well, I can see them saying, not my Messiah, just because of how kind he was to Samaritans. You get a better idea of how hard of an ask that was for them to believe in him as Messiah when he would show that kind of grace to their bitterest enemies. All right, next week, I'm going to finish this up a little bit. Hopefully it'll take a little bit. And then we'll get into the other books. It wasn't just the Old Testament scrolls that the people were reading back then. It was other books that are not in our book. There's a reason why. There are a lot of reasons why they're not. We'll get into those next week. Thank you.